Welcome to another episode of Off the Menu. I'm Vincent Franchini from Tumblr House, here with Charles Coulombe. For our first question...
That's it? You just want to dive into it?
Yeah, well, do you have anything to say?
Well, yeah, I have something to say.
Floor is yours.
To the traditional calendar, this is June 2nd. The feasts of St. Marcellinus, Peter, and Erasmus. And you know Erasmus better as St. Elmo. St. Elmo's fire.
Yeah, the sailor thing.
Yeah, and the weird lighting on the ships and all that, which I think, given the tenor of some of these questions, is an appropriate day.
Yeah, some interesting questions today.
I'll say.
Okay, for our first one, Ben Emerson kindly requests that you talk about two specific topics.
Yes.
Medieval Catholic guilds and King Alfred the Great of England.
Okay, well, I'm glad he asked kindly. You know, if he'd gotten nasty and thrown something, that wouldn't have been helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's take them in order. The guilds. These were great. I mean, the whole medieval guild idea was a really tremendous thing. Basically, the guilds regulated specific trades, or those are artisan or craftsman guilds, or they regulated trade in general. Those were merchant guilds. What they all had in common was that they regulated a given industry, and they supported the people who practiced it. So, and there were several different facets to it. So firstly, let's say you wanted to be a candle maker. Okay, now usually it would help if your dad had been a candle maker before you. But one way or the other, you would be apprenticed by the guild would apprentice you to a candle maker. Then you'd become what was called a journeyman after you learned the trade up to a certain point. And then finally you'd produce what was called your masterpiece, or your masterwork. The guild would judge that and determine whether you had in fact reached a sufficient skill level to be admitted as a full member of the guild. And of course, to sell candles or make them in that town, you'd have to be a member of that guild. But that was only one part of it. There's more. The guild also took the place of an insurance company. So let's say you died.
Mm-hmm.
You're a paid-up member of the guild. Well, your wife, your widow, well, you're buried at their expense. And your wife and children get the equivalent of insurance support until the children come of age. So that was the second part of it. But wait, there's more.
Okay.
It was also it also had a very strongly religious aspect, in the sense that the guild would be devoted to the patron saint of the trade. Every trade has a patron saint.
Right.
You know, St. Crispin for the cobblers and people like that. They very often either had a chapel of their own, or they would endow a side chapel in the church or cathedral. They would have on the annual feast day, they would have a mass and celebration. And sometimes for some of the major feasts like Corpus Christi, they might sponsor a play. And in processions like that, you've got to imagine, in addition to the more normal thing, we've got a play at a fixed location. In some of the processions, they would have these sort of floats, wagons. And on the wagon, a play would be going on during the course of the procession.
Wow.
And this was an amazing thing. But anyway, the guild handled all that kind of stuff. They survived in Catholic Europe until the French Revolution. Some of them, a few of them, reworked, survive in France and Italy and Spain today. But where they really held out, of all places, were England and Switzerland, where they kind of desiccated but survived, and now they're kind of elite organizations, especially the so-called livery companies of London, of the little square mile in the middle of town, the square mile they call it, the city. The guilds still have their churches there and play a big part in the governance of the city, because that was the fourth element of guild life, which was they often played a role in governing the city they were in. So remember that what made a town in those days was being at a confluence of trade routes, having an annual fair, a weekly market. And trade and crafts were a big part of a town's survival. A city was different from a town because a city would have a bishop and a cathedral. That's what made a city status. But in either case, the craft and the merchant guilds very often had a large part in the governing of the town. In a lot of places, they chose the mayor. I mean, together as a group, not individually. And then, of course, in some towns, there was sort of a running fight between the guilds, the town nobility or patricians, and the bishop and and all that. But that's now in the latter part of the 19th century, a gentleman called Arthur Penty invented something called guild socialism, which looked to adopt the guild system to modern economy. Mm-hmm. He was a great friend of Chesterton and Belloc and all that, and guild socialism later ended up closely connected to distributism and all that sort of thing. But anyway, those are the guilds.
So you said merchant guild? There's a merchant guild? Like, what would be your masterpiece in a merchant guild?
Oh, I really couldn't tell you. I know the craft guilds better, but obviously they had some criteria for full membership. What it is, I couldn't tell you offhand.
Okay, what about hunters and farmers? Did they have guilds?
Of sorts. Well, I mean, see, it's important to bear in mind that guilds were one kind of confraternity. Okay. And there were tons of confraternities, brotherhoods.
Right.
They had them for the way things were in those days is if you had a particular task that needed to get done, you'd form a fraternity, a brotherhood to do it. So they had bridge building brotherhoods. You know, we've been, for years and years and years, we've been putting up with a ferry at this point. We need a bridge.
Yeah.
So you would form a brotherhood under St. Julian or St. Benezet or somebody like that, and you build a bridge. And that was what you did. In certain places, they had brotherhoods whose sole responsibility was protecting stretches of the highway from robbers. And in Spain, they call those the Santa Hermandades, the Holy Brotherhoods. You had others that were purely religious. You know, they would process on, and some of those still existed in Spain and Latin America and elsewhere, who would process in Eastern Europe. I'm sorry, gosh, I don't know where my mind is today. They would process in Holy Week and Easter and so forth. You had hunting fraternities and farmers fraternities.
Oh, okay.
But these are all, it's important to understand that these are all part of the same basic phenomenon. In medieval society, if you wanted to get something done, you got a group together under the patronage of a saint, and you went to work and you did it. Now you notice how much direction came from the capital. Oh yeah, that's right, none. Because they were very, very much more aware than we are of a reality of life, which is that most of your living takes place on the local sphere. The equivalent, let's say like here in this town, you decided that there was a wilderness area that's just been trashed up. I say this because I know there is one like that.
Right, yeah.
Well, okay. You would have formed, say, a Brotherhood of St. Hubert, the patron of hunters. And the members would swear to gather, once a year you gather on St. Hubert's Day and have the Mass and all that and a banquet. You do some other things. But you devote X number of days a year to cleaning that place up. Now, would the order come from the mayor to do this? No. What about the provincial governor? No. How about the king himself? No. No. When locals were sufficiently aware of the space around them, that when they saw a problem, they got to work and took care of it. Fortunately, we've escaped all that.
Yeah. Well, this is California, so I'm sure some sort of permit or license is required.
Well, we wait for Governor Brown to come and do it for us.
Yeah.
Given that he's dead and rose again. The one problem with Governor Brown is he can't appear in daylight. No, you know what happens. You turn to ash.
Yeah.
All right. So, King Alfred.
King Alfred.
Well, King Alfred lived in the 900s. He was the first real king of United England. I think there were one or two others before him, but he was the first effective one. Fought the Danes. In a lot of ways did for England what Charlemagne did for Western Europe. Great promoter of learning. As I say, unified the country after driving out the Danes. He has a popular cultus. That is to say, he's regarded as a blessed in some quarters. They think that they may have found his remains, not unlike Richard III, and for the same reason.
Oh, yeah.
Because he was buried in Hyde Abbey, which of course was destroyed by Henry VIII. But in digging it up, they found a set of bones many years ago that they think may well be Alfred's. Then, as I say, he has a certain local veneration as a semi-saint. Did a lot of good for the church, did a lot of good for education, and so on. And Chesterton wrote a long ballad, the Ballad of the White Horse.
Yes.
About Alfred and how he defeated the Danes. So, Alfred the Great.
Okay. Jake Sullivan wrote in saying, I was wondering if Charles knew anything about the folklore involving the wild hunt, and if there were any records of sightings of it in pre-Christian or medieval Europe. And does he know about any other cavalcades of spirits in European folklore?
Wow, is this October? No, it actually, just like with St. Elmo, June is, speaking of European folklore, June is a very spooky month.
Why is that?
Well, because June 23rd, St. John's Eve, or Midsummer Eve, in Europe is like Halloween in summer.
St. John the Baptist?
Yeah. They have big bonfires and tell ghost stories, and there are all sorts of weird legends about strange things happening on St. John's Eve. People getting drunk and all kinds of stuff. But later in the summer, like into July, August, the Chinese have their Hungry Ghost Festival, which the Japanese call Obon. So I guess the summer could be a weird time. You know, you don't have to wait till Halloween to get weirded out by everything.
Yeah.
And of course, if you're living in the present, weirded out is probably a good state of mind to remain in permanently. But at any rate, I'm digressing. The wild hunt. Well, yes, I do know a bit about the wild hunt. It comes in many different forms. In England, they, at least in southern England, they spoke of the wild hunt as being led by Herne the Hunter, who was a huntsman of King Henry II, who was killed in Windsor Forest. And it's referenced by Sir John Falstaff in Merry Wives of Windsor. The northern England, they call them the Gabriel Hounds. There's St. Hubert's Hounds in Belgium. They have many, in some versions, the devil is the chief huntsman. In others, it's a character who insisted on hunting when he shouldn't have. Like the dandy dogs are supposed to be led by a friar who neglected all of his duties to go hunting constantly. And so the devil showed up one day, and it was on a holy day when he shouldn't have gone hunting. And the devil told him that he knew some great sport. And all of his friends, who were as debauched as he was, said, I wouldn't go with that man, and not today. He said, oh, nonsense, I'll hunt with him even though I've got to go to hell itself. So off with the good friar and his hounds, and you can see them up to this day. And one of the typical stories that they tell, and I've got to say there are medieval chronicles and all that, monks' writings and so forth, where people have seen these things, so I've not had myself, I can't tell you. But the one folk tale that comes to mind, bearing in mind that in a lot of versions, what the wild hunt is hunting for are damned souls and unbaptized infants.
Wow.
The fellow was drunk one night. He's coming home from the tavern, and he sees the wild hunt, and he says to the huntsman, "Share me your, share your quarry with me." And the huntsman laughs at him, throws him a bag, and rides off. When he opens the bag, and it's his infant child,
Oh my God.
who then vanishes, and he rides home as fast as ever he can, only to find his cheerful wife telling him that the unbaptized infant had died.
So, unbaptized, like, why was the infant unbaptized? They decided
Just-
not to baptize
No,
it?
to a time element. But that's why in Western Europe, baptizing a kid immediately after he was born was considered the thing to do because it made him immune to all that kind of stuff. It drew him out of Satan's kingdom. In the witch lore of the Middle Ages, a lot of the things they called for, versus their candles,
I'm sorry,
called
did you
for
say witch war?
witch lore.
Oh, witch lore. Okay.
I don't know, witch lore. Oh, sorry, the lore of witches.
Oh, the lore of witches. I'm sorry.
Called for the use of the fat of unbaptized children and candles and flying ointment and things like that. In the west of France, the Vendée and places like that, mothers wouldn't embrace their child until they'd been baptized. So it's a good thing, despite living in a day where children can go for months.
Yeah.
I think our ancestors, regardless of whether or not this stuff is literally true, I think, given the possibility of death, crib death, and so forth,
Yeah.
I think baptizing the kids straight away is a smart idea. And then you can do all of your classes for the godparents and all of your filling out of the paperwork
Yeah.
and all that stuff. Maybe that could be done in due course. In New York, of course, we always make the joke about Puerto Rican baptisms because the old grandmother immediately baptizes the kid in the hospital. And then they'll do a conditional baptism later.
Okay.
It's almost regular practice.
Wow.
But don't wait on that baptism, gang. Not if there's the slightest bit of danger. You don't want the kid being taken off. There are two, you might say not exactly parodies, but versions of the same idea in more recent times. My own people, the French Canadians, tell a horrible tale about the Chasse-Galerie, which is a canoe full of voyageurs who insisted on going out trading on a holy day, and ended up in the devil's employ. And so there's sort of a Flying Dutchman canoe. And then most recently, let's see how good your memory is, there's a country western song made famous amongst others by Johnny Cash that deals with a similar story.
A Western country?
Country western.
John, I'm not a big. I don't listen to a lot of Johnny Cash. I'm sorry.
You see, ladies and gentlemen, this America's youth. All right. Ghost Riders in the Sky. No?
No, I'm sorry.
Minnie Pearl?
No.
She has nothing to do with it. Anyway, Ghost Riders in the Sky is a sort of country western cowboy retelling of the Wild Hunt story.
Wow.
So, when you're done listening, ladies and gentlemen, you slink in there to your video, Ghost Riders in the Sky, which actually, oddly enough, gives you a great feeling, if you will, for that particular legend. Kind of like Dickie Lee's Laurie does such a good job for the Vanishing Hitchhiker. But anyway.
Sounds like the Wild Hunt is really tied to Christianity.
It is. I mean, in some versions, one of the old gods, Odin or Thor or somebody, is doing it. But yeah, it's in the versions we have, it certainly is tied to Christianity. And with a lot of this stuff, it's like with the Christmas tree. It may have had heathen origins, but trust me, most people don't put it up at Christmas to pray to the Norse gods. That's not what's going on there.
Okay. Joe wrote in saying, "Hi, can Mr. Coulombe address usury? The church seems to have been silent on the issue for a few centuries. What are examples today of loans that are permissible by Catholic moral theology, and what are examples of loans that are sinful? Thanks." It's a great question.
It is a tremendous question. I wish I had better prepared for it. However, I can say that one of the interesting modern things, I've just finished going over the Compendium of Social Doctrine, which you can find, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, on the Holy See website. A lot of good stuff in there, and they deal with usury. And they talk about what a terrible thing usury is and how it ruins economies and ruins people's lives because they run up these huge debts,
Right.
of which, the principal is a teeny tiny bit.
It's an interesting compare and contrast, I think, because back in the day when you wanted a loan, it was like, well, what is this loan for? What are you doing? But now it's sort of, like with credit cards, you can do whatever you want.
Do whatever you want as
discriminate.
long as you pay an enormous amount of interest.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it would be very difficult for me to give an exact answer to this question in terms of what would be sinful, what wouldn't. I can tell you what was done in the Middle Ages, and that might. If you take out a loan, you're a victim of whatever they want to do for you, and taking out a loan in this case also includes a credit card. But, personally, I only have debit cards now.
Right.
But that's because I'm cheap. But you don't get into insurance with debit cards, and you don't spend more than you actually have.
Right.
Which is another problem, a related but separate problem to usury as a sin. There's also the fact that the credit economy has gotten everyone used to living beyond their means.
Yeah.
And they run up these huge debts, most of which are in fact interest. And then they go crazy trying to pay them. But anyway, I can only really answer the question with the way it was done in Catholic times, the Middle Ages. You're right, they would ask, what is this for, and so forth. They generally asked for collateral worth more than the actual loan. So in other words, they would charge 1 to 2% interest. And that was purely for the what you might call the servicing of the loan.
Right.
But let's say you wanted 200 florins. You would be expected to bring something to them that was worth maybe 300 florins.
What if you didn't have anything? So you had to be of means to get a loan.
You had to be a means to get a loan. But what would happen, though? Let's say you defaulted on the loan.
Yeah.
They would sell the thing, right? Now remember, it's worth 300 florins. They would take their 200 plus the 1 or 2% and give you the remainder.
Okay.
So, it'd be unfortunate if you having to part with whatever the object was. And I'm using kind of a grotesque example because obviously most people didn't require loans that big, and so the collateral didn't have to be that big. But, and here's the big but, in order to, they had certain religious orders that specialized in doing this. And there's an institution in Western Europe and in Latin America called the Mons Pietas, Mountain of Piety. And they specialized in loans for the poor. But what if you didn't have any collateral at all, and what if you didn't want to go through the rigmarole? Where did you go to get a loan? You went to the Jews. Because they were not bound by the laws against usury, not being Catholic. And so that meant that they could charge whatever interest they liked. But they would give loans that the Mons Pietas and these other places wouldn't look at. So on the one hand, you'd have to pay a lot more than you would to these others, but on the other hand, you were likely to get it if you didn't have any collateral. That's what the Merchant of Venice is all about.
Seems like a really complicated issue because it seems like there is a definite good to the modern loan system in a sense then compared to the previous, which is that how could you get a house? How could you put up $500,000 collateral for a house?
Well, you wouldn't. What would happen is that you and your neighbors would build your house.
Ah. But we live in a world of specialization. What if you're not
sure
in construction?
We sure do. Well, see, remember that the key to this modern world is usury. The usury came first.
That's, okay.
But you're right. It is, we live in a world so far removed from that and from most of the world as it is today. If you lived in some favela or something in the third world, your neighbors would help you put up the ticky-tacky. Or if you lived under a bridge here at Alvarado Street, Your neighbors would help you put up your ticky-tacky, and that was it.
Well, okay.
But it's not an easy question to answer, and I wish I had an easy answer for you, and I don't.
So, wait, are you saying it's better if we constructed our own homes nowadays? Because,
Well, in theory it would be, but you pointed out a problem, and the problem with that is that it's very difficult to do that. I mean, if I were to construct a house myself, it would probably be made out of cardboard, because I'd be too lazy to get the wood going. In the first rain, it would be ruined.
Yeah.
The thing is, we do have a very artificial economy based upon usury. And it's based upon this enormous amount of debt being serviced. It's like a merry-go-round.
Yeah.
If that merry-go-round ever stops, we'll all be stuck. And I can think of any number of reasons why it would stop.
Yeah.
China holds most of our paper. And the thing is, that's a tiger by the tail situation. Because on the one hand, they could destroy us.
But
they destroy themselves.
Exactly. It's a symbiotic relationship.
Exactly. So, round and round and round it goes, and where it stops, nobody knows.
Random fun fact, Mark Stein, I read his book, he says that the interest that China gets on their debt, or our debt, they finance their military with. That's how much of our debt they own. Just a fun fact. Yeah. So it's a lot.
Isn't it wonderful that President Nixon opened China's doors? You were saying.
Okay.
I say that, by the way, as a great lover of Chinese culture, hence my knowledge of the Hungry Ghost Festival. Lest you think I'm anti-Chinese. I had Chinese food last night, actually.
Wow, you're definitely not anti-Chinese.
No, you can't really hate anybody if you like their food.
That's true.
It is. I mean, you'll always have a certain sympathy, even if, like, I'm a great fan of Jewish deli. I love Jewish food. Does that make me sympathetic to the Jewish faith? Not really. Does it make me sympathetic to the Jewish culture? Oh, yeah.
No. Okay. Joshua Hernandez from Miami, Florida asks, what can you tell us about the eccentric and shadowy figure of Montague Summers? There seems to be very little known about his personal life. Have you read any of his works? If so, could you offer any interesting stories found in his writings or any anecdotes about his life? Please, Charles, tell us strange things.
That's what Montague Summers used to say.
Oh, really?
When he would meet people and say, tell me strange things. And they would. Well, firstly, is this October?
I know.
I thought we had the pumpkin up when we did the Halloween show.
We did.
Ladies and gentlemen, there's a lot of weird stuff out there, and you guys are right in the middle of it. Thankfully, here in the studio, we're safe from all badness. Anyway, well, Montague Summers was an interesting character. He was born in the late 19th century, died in 1948. He was raised actually one of the Plymouth Brethren. Now, that's not a religion you've heard of, but they were very austere. He became an Anglican, went to university, was very erudite, Latin, Greek, that kind of stuff. He converted to Anglicanism, as I say, and went into Anglican holy orders, worked in a couple of parishes, was at a school for a while, and apparently there was some sort of scandal. What kind, I don't know, I wasn't there.
Okay.
And then he converted to Catholicism, and that's where it gets really weird.
Okay.
Because that he was ordained a priest, we know of a certainty. But whether he was ordained by a Catholic priest in Italy or some random old Catholic, that's an area of dispute. His biographer and friend, he knew him, was the great Carmelite Father Brocard Sewell, whom I knew slightly.
Okay.
Chatted with on the phone once or twice and exchanged some correspondence. And Father Sewell was a interesting man all in himself, Carmelite, and the editor of their magazine, Blackfriars, I think it was called. Anyway, Whitefriars? Well, whatever it was. Whitefriars, yeah, it was Whitefriars magazine. He He was of the opinion that he had, in fact, been ordained by a priest in Italy. You see, in those days, there were tons of tiny dioceses in Italy. There still are, but there were many more. They've amalgamated a lot of them since the council. And that he was what Father Sewell believed was the case. He wrote a biography of him, a memoir, and he also edited the Galanti Show, which was Montague Summers's, autobiography. Now, Father Summers acquired notoriety in several areas. He never worked for a diocese, maintaining that as his bishop was in Italy, and as he wasn't setting up a public church or acting as a public priest, he didn't have to care, and he didn't. He devoted himself to different kinds of scholarship. He was famous for the restoration drama work he did. What does that mean, you ask? Well, the period after King Charles II came back to the throne, after Cromwell died, to the overthrow of King James II. So we're talking 1660 to 1685.
Okay.
88. It's called the Restoration.
Okay.
And it was a tremendous time on the English stage. They wrote a tremendous number of plays. This was in succession to Shakespeare's time. Because remember, under Cromwell, the English stage was suppressed. There were no plays.
Wow. Okay.
So there was no Christmas either. Anyway, Cromwell's gone. The Puritans are dealt with. The king is back. So you know what happened. Theater came roaring back with a vengeance. So did Christmas and Easter. So a lot of plays were written at that time, and Montague Summers preserved a lot of them, edited them, and belonged to a company that put them on. A lot of the plays that they performed had not been performed in 300 years.
How did he get access to that?
Well, because the manuscripts are still very much around, in places like the Bodleian Library at Oxford and so on.
And just no one else was interested?
Well, they weren't when he started.
Oh, okay.
They were when he finished.
Okay.
Because he really revived them. Now, another area that he was very famous for was his scholarship on the Gothic novel. Now, when I say the Gothic novel, I don't mean the kind of lurid covered things that we had when I was a kid, where you'd have this woman in a filmy nightgown standing, looking up at the moon, with a towered house behind her and a light shining, and a name like Mistress of Falconbrook. No.
Okay.
Not that kind of Gothic novel. But basically what we would call today the horror novel.
Okay.
Starting with the Castle of Otranto in the 18th century, and going down through Dracula and Frankenstein and all that. Frankenstein with the Romantics, Dracula, and all these sorts of novels, the ghost stories and all that kind of thing, that the 19th century was so big into. So he really restored, wrote a book called The Gothic Quest, and he showed that these novels were worthy of scholarly attention, which people simply had not thought of before.
Okay.
And he also published 2 anthologies of ghost stories. So that's the second area that he was famous for. But it's really the third area that our questioner wants to know about. And I'm not telling. No. Yeah. Tough. No, I'll tell you. He was also very much interested in the occult.
There we go.
There we go.
Okay.
And specifically from the Catholic viewpoint. But from a Catholic viewpoint that modern Catholics often find embarrassing. Because, I can think about it. That sort of thing never happens except when it does. So, his first book to gain him an audience in this area was called The History of Witchcraft, which he followed up, and in that, unlike the modern theory of witchcraft borrowed from the Wiccans, that age-old religion going back to the 1920s.
Yeah, of course.
He described witches as being at once in league with Satan, individuals that sold their souls to Satan for power, but also connected it to the Cathars and the Manichaeans and people like that.
Oh.
He believed it, you know.
He believed in the devil, or what?
No, yes, he believed in the devil, but he believed in the possibility of people acquiring supernatural powers through giving themselves over to the devil.
Okay.
Now this is, I have to say, a universal motif in human legendary. Every culture we know of has a belief in people who give themselves over to whatever that people consider the powers of darkness in return for power.
Yeah.
Now, the second book he wrote of that sort was called The Geography of Witchcraft. Then he wrote a couple more books. One was The Vampire, His Kith and Kin, and then The Vampire in Europe. And he shocked the then contemporary imagination by positing that there was reality to the vampire stories. Then he wrote a book called The Werewolf.
Wow.
Then he wrote The Physical Phenomena of Mysticism.
He's really covering the whole spectrum, isn't he?
He sure did. He sure did. But the thing is, unlike so many writers in these areas today, even writers of, shall we say, theological works, he backed up everything he could with the best possible sources. So, that is the work of Montague Summers. Now, supposedly, the story goes that he got this interest before he became a priest, oddly enough. He went to a black mass in Brussels while he was still an Anglican. Belgium, that is.
Right.
And apparently, so the story goes, what he saw there frightened him out of his wits. And that was what propelled him to become first Anglican, then Catholic, and then a priest. He did a lot of traveling into very strange, out-of-the-way places, and apparently had a few very bizarre adventures. But they told the funny stories about him at Oxford, where he lived. The story goes that you would see him walking down the street, accompanied either by a large black dog or a little child, but never by both. The implication being that it was his familiar. And then there was the story of his walking down. He was a tubby guy, and he always wore a cassock and a beretta. He never ran around in civilian clothes.
Yeah.
So he was walking down the street in Oxford, and he gets hit by a bicyclist, a young university goer. The bicyclist goes flying, off his bicycle, and Summers is lying there in the street. So they both pick themselves up, brush themselves off. But at the point of impact, the cyclist said, "The devil," and Summers said, "Oh, my dear Lord Christ." Well, when he brushed himself off, he looked down at the collegiate and said, "Well, young man, you have proclaimed your God, and I have proclaimed mine." So, and he also translated a lot of things like the Malleus Maleficarum and Demoniality and all that, which were standard books on these topics from the Middle Ages. Demoniality is actually about the fairies, despite the name.
Yeah.
And poltergeists and things like that.
Yeah, you've talked about this book before.
I have, and his foreword is actually as useful as the book itself, by the great Dominican theologian Lodovico Sinistrari. So with all this kind of thing, he would, people would say, "Well, how can you really believe in this?" And he would say, "Well, how can you not?"
Well, Malleus Maleficarum, that's witch hammer. Isn't that like a Catholic teaching on how to
discover witches,
yeah,
and how to deal with them. Yep. And he includes the papal bull that gave it its authority. I know it's embarrassing. Oh well. What is that word my mother used to use in similar set? Oh, tough. Yeah, I remember.
I don't see what's the harm in recognizing that there is very serious evil in the world.
Well, because if you did that, you might imply that we're not perfect. how could there be mutatis mutandis? You remember the movie L.A. Confidential?
Yes.
Well, the character played by Danny DeVito asks a cognate question: how can there be organized crime in a city with the finest police department in the world? Well, how could there be all this evil, demonic stuff when we're so wonderful?
That's very true.
See? I mean, obviously, this would imply that we're not perfect. And also, we don't know everything. You know, with this kind of thing, which is more properly referred to as preternatural rather than supernatural, just so you'll know. And with the truly supernatural, the miraculous thing, Eucharistic miracles, weeping statues, apparitions of Our Lady, all that kind of stuff. That is supernatural.
Yeah.
This kind of stuff is preternatural. But whatever it is, on some level, we human beings, especially we moderns, resent it. And we resent it because it has no business sticking its nose into our tidy little reality, where we're absolutely free to kill infants and marry dogs. We hate that. Oh, our little hands flutter, our faces flush with rage. How can anyone believe in such nonsense? And as I say, as for we ourselves, we don't believe in it at all until it happens. And then all of a sudden, oh, there's a wonderful meme, you know, on the internet. It's easy to make fun of the Catholic Church until you have a demon in your house.
I love that one.
Yeah, and suddenly, well. So at any rate, so I hope I've told you sufficiently strange things. What else you got?
Okay, for our last question, Anthony wrote in to say, I'm going to be entering seminary soon, and as someone as cultured and intelligent as you, I was wondering what are the main qualities you look for in a good and holy priest?
Well, firstly, Anthony, you don't get out much if you think I'm cultured. But, no, seriously, I'll tell you what I would look for, but bear in mind, what I would look for is not what the elderly ex-nun or pants-suited nun of a dying order, who in so many seminaries decides who gets in. What I think and what she thinks may be different. And remember, she's the boss. She wears the trousers with that admission board. So, having said with that caveat, so understand what I'm going to say. If you display that in front of Sister Mary Virago, you're not getting in. Fortunately, she and her kind are fewer than they were, and of course I know what you're thinking. How in God's name would she know what would make a good priest?
Yeah.
Why don't we just have guys deciding who's going to get into the convent?
Yeah.
But bearing in mind that she probably comes from an order that doesn't get any vocations anyway. She's got to do something with her time.
That's true.
See? One thing you'll never see on those review boards are fully habited sisters from thriving congregations. That, too, you would think, would mean something to somebody somewhere. But why should it? To answer your question, first thing I look for in a priest is two qualities that are totally intertwined: prayer and belief. And in prayer and belief, above all and beyond everything else, the Blessed Sacrament. I look for a man for whom, if he had the power to offer Mass, and for some reason was unable to do so on a given day, would really feel unhappy about it. A priest is a priest because he makes the holy sacrifice. And so that you need to be totally in love with our Lord and the Blessed Sacrament. Absolutely. And similarly, you should have a tremendous love for Our Lady, as both your queen and your mother. Queen of the priesthood and mother of priests. And the angels and saints. I mean, you can never have too many devotions. And you really have to believe the entirety of the Catholic faith. You need to be able to take the four creeds and read them without flinching. And be able to say, when you finish the fourth, I believe. without quibbling, without, well, yeah, but on anything. You just take it as it is, and bear in mind that you are consecrating your life to preaching what's in those 4 creeds, because that, plus the sacraments that you wield, are what will bring us, as in the lay people, salvation. That brings you to another point, and that is that I look for priests who realize that they are here to serve. I don't mean here to tell us what we want to hear. I don't mean that. I mean here to bring the means of salvation to us. That's the only reason, if you're a priest, you exist. Otherwise, why would I give tuppence about you? Why would I care? Why should I care? Beyond that, there are things that are helpful, but not absolutely necessary. A man of a sense of humor, I would say, is all important, like St. Philip Neri had. Because you're going to be dealing with the human condition. And if you don't realize that human beings are absurd, including yourself, you'll go crazy. Really and truly. You need to be able to sit back, look at the whole thing, and at least have a small giggle in private. Be discreet, because guffaws coming out of the confessional are never a good sign. Especially if it's to the priest's side. It's bad enough if it's the penitent laughing. The priest is laughing. You know something's up. So don't do that. But, and I look for someone in the confessional who will challenge me without trying to kill me. Now, mind you, there aren't many of those tough guys anymore. You don't generally run into them. But if you have the slightest concern about the way I present one of my sins to you, speak up. Because nobody else is going to. I mean, that's the thing. The confession is the one place where I can be myself, where I can be honest. And so unless you've got 25 people and 10 minutes left in confession, in which case, get through it as quick as you can, unless you're in that position, listen to me. I mean, you're not a counselor, but you are a doctor of souls. And if I come to you and I say, my brother's driving me crazy, or my wife's driving me crazy, remind me that maybe it's not them. And even if it is them, I'm the only one I have control over. So that's the thing. Listen to the confessional. Be polite. Any sign of impoliteness on your part, of nastiness, of superiority, and again, one thing we Americans have trouble with is distinguishing between behaving well, carrying yourself well, and behaving in a superior manner. There is a difference. But bear in mind that anything you might do to drive someone away, even if it's just being too bureaucratic, too businesslike, at a time when, someone's getting married or they're dying or there's a baptism need or whatever it might be, you might very well drive someone outside the church, and endanger their souls. And you'll be responsible for that. So, you've got to be firm, but you can't be nasty. And again, it goes back to putting the Blessed Sacrament and the faith and the souls of your people above every other consideration. It's very, very important. You also need, and now I'm going to descend from these lofty heights, you learn some financial theory. Now, mind you, this is exactly what I'm terrible at. But you need to be able to balance a budget. You need to be able to do the nuts and bolts of parish life. If that's not your calling, then try to stick to chaplaincies, where you'll never have to worry about that. But if you are a pastor, that's going to be a problem. So just keep that in mind.
Mother Angelica was retelling the story of St. John Vianney.
Yeah.
And apparently he was not a smart man. He was very low IQ. And this was an issue because he wasn't passing tests. It was a real controversy. And so they went to the bishop, and the bishop asked one question about John Vianney. Is he pious? Yes. Okay. Priest. And then that was it. And I remember after Mother Angelica told that story, she said, nowadays they don't, pious, they'll throw them out. We want social workers.
That's very true. Well, that goes back. Notice that Mother Angelica was not a nun deciding who gets into seminary.
Right. But I did have one question. What is piety? What does it mean to be pious?
Devotion, worship, prayer. A pious person is a person of prayer, a person of devotion, a person of worship. An impious person is someone who's the opposite. So, I mean, if you're assiduous in your prayers, you're pious. The pious person prays every day. The pious person goes to Mass as often as he can, to confession as often as he can. Really believes it, takes it seriously. That's what it is to be pious. Try, however, also, and again, this isn't an absolute essential thing, but the better educated you are and the more cultured you are, the more people you'll be able to appeal to. And what is it to be cultured? Well, it's to be well-read. It's to be well-rounded. It's to have an interest in things other than purely professional ones. Now, I know what you're thinking. I've just said that should be your major focus. It should be a major focus. But bear in mind that everything else, from gardening to literature to hunting to whatever you might be doing, can also be turned to your work. Because, number one, all these things are reflections of God's creation. If you have any interest in them, then you can appeal in a particular manner to other people who have an interest in them. But yeah, I mean, don't make up an interest that you don't have. But if you do have a natural bent, whether it be like Father Summers for theater and literature, or whether it be some other thing, develop that bent as part of the evangelization process. But always bear in mind that it's not for its own self and it's not for your pleasure, really, alone. But for evangelization, for the greater good, for the common good of your people. All of this is a lot of stuff to ask out of any one individual. You bet. But that's why many are called, few are chosen. That's why most people aren't called to the priesthood. I do hope, Anthony, that all of this having been said, you become a priest, you succeed, you do well, because God knows we need good and holy priests. Well, we have, your generation are producing some really, really fine men, and I hope you'll be one of them. I really do. However, I'm going to insist, because you asked me, that if you do get ordained, you remember me at every single one of your masses.
Wow, that's asking a lot.
Well, what did he just do? He asked a lot out of me. He asked me to disagree with Sister Mary Virago on television. Well, podcasting, same thing.
You give him some advice for 10 minutes, and now every Mass he has to say from now on is dedicated to you?
Not dedicated, just remembered.
Just remembered?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
It's just when he's praying, every priest offers Mass for a ton of intentions. There's the principal intention, which you got the dough for. But then, remember his Aunt Sadie, whatever. Just remember me at that time. Hey, I've just risked my soul by going up against Sister. All right?
Okay, fair enough.
She could sacrifice me to the elder gods. And who's going to protect me? You, Anthony? I don't think so.
Okay, well, Anthony?
Or one of the priests she's approved and likes. He might sacrifice me to the elder gods.
Okay. That's it for this episode.
Hey, listen, this is a weird bunch of questions. I have a right to give it a weird ending, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. This is your show.
And if you thought you were safe because it's not autumn, we've got a lot of you guys gals have a lot of weird questions out there. I don't mind them. Send them all in. I don't care. But there's weird stuff going on in this world. Dickie Lee said it best. Strange things happen in this world. Yeah.
They certainly do.
Gosh. Anyway, there was something I did want to draw attention to. What was it? Oh, You notice there wasn't a single political question.
Yeah, we don't get a lot of those political questions. Yeah.
I'm glad. I'll answer them if you send them. But you know, we all know it's a mess, don't we? And more frightening than anything Montague Summers ever wrote about.
See you next time.
Take care.